Due to COVID-19, the May PFA board meeting will be held virtually. Individuals who wish to make comments regarding items scheduled on the agenda or wish to address the PFA board during public comment on items not specifically scheduled on the agenda will use the Q&A option in the virtual meeting, or individuals may send public comment to publiccomment@poudre-fire.org, and a moderator will deliver the comments to the board during public comment. All right, so we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. So, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I guess we first will go to public comment. Do we have any public comment that's come in?
Nothing at this time.
Nothing at this time. No one raising hands or anything like that. Okay. Well, people are also free to, as a reminder, people are also free to comment on agenda items and use your Q&A and send us emails if you have public comment. And we'll get that addressed. So the first item on the agenda then is the discussion item, the agenda planning calendar. So I don't know if there's any input on the planning calendar. Everybody saw the planning calendar?
Looks good.
Okay.
For me.
All right. Have we talked about at all when we might be, how long, as things open up, if we want to start meeting in person and what that might look like?
We just had a little discussion informally before we started the meeting. Mike and I were having a little bit of that discussion, and
Okay.
we'll kind of be following the lead with council. I anticipate, though, since we are at the end of June, we will know far more. So a couple of weeks out, we'll be able to maybe have a limited meeting of some sort, or and maybe look at the venue if we do come back in person, where we can maintain our spacing and all that stuff. So that's what we'll be watching.
Okay.
Have you opened up the office yet?
Our offices will open on Monday with limited staffing. We have Chief Howell and Ann have been working on a plan for that. We'll be at about 50% staffing. We'll still have staff working from home, but we'll have the fire prevention desk open along, and that coincides with the counter at the building department. So when we get back to a little bit more normal, and we'll have restrictions in place with masks and gatherings and that in that space. So
Okay, but at least we have an opening to have our meetings in there if need be.
yeah.
Okay.
We'll be following the county health department and CDPHE's guidelines for group size and distancing and masks and all those things.
Tom, that room is pretty small. So have you thought about using maybe council chambers or some other space that we could spread out better?
Absolutely. There's the option of council chambers. There's also the option of training room 1, which is the big training room out at the training division. We have several
Okay.
that we get into scheduling as we look at those possibilities, and we will be evaluating those over the next week to 2 for that.
And does our the emergency ordinances that we've enacted, do those allow for a hybrid? So if someone was not comfortable coming in, or we couldn't maintain the spacing, that we could do kind of a hybrid option? I don't know what that might look like. Has that been explored at all?
we have a meeting with Dino later today, our attorney, Dino Ross, and we'll confirm that with him, but I assume that it does. If I remember right, when we first did the order, it does allow for a combination, but we will confirm that through our council.
That would be good. I mean, I know there's some of us that are dying to get out of their houses, but there are other people that, if they might be symptomatic or have other health, underlying health issues, that may not be as comfortable, and we don't want to force anybody to be on their comfort zone. And so, okay, thank you.
Hey, Christian, this is Mike.
Mike, go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
council still online to be looking at the Mulberry annexation in the fall?
That's a good question. I don't know if Darren is on yet, but I mean, I haven't heard about it. I could look at the 6-month calendar and check, but maybe we can have Darren answer that when he comes on. You know, everything's all, you know, with a crisis, everything has kind of been pushed back a bit, but I don't know if that's the case with the Mulberry annexation. So, I mean, Ken, you can jump in if you know more about this too. But if not, we can certainly.
Well, as you know, that's a pretty important issue for the district board.
I do know that. Yeah. So we'll and you know, we are trying to keep business as usual. So my guess is that we will be discussing that.
Yeah,
Darren says he's muted and can't unmute. So I don't know if somebody can help with that. I just got a
Can you
text.
help with that with Darren?
Is he called in on the phone?
I don't, I'm not sure how he's called in.
Kirsten, do you want to resend him a link to this?
He called in, he said. He called in. So I don't know if that's
There's a phone number out there that is.
Oh, there's a phone number.
okay.
There we go. That's it.
Is that it? Okay.
Can you hear me, Kristen?
There he is.
There you are, Darren.
Hey. Hey,
Hi,
good morning,
Darren.
everyone. I've been sitting quietly for the last 5 minutes listening to you and wanting to speak up, so I apologize.
No, that's
I think
okay.
we weren't talking about you,
yeah.
Darren.
I heard that, and thanks. Everything was so positive. I really appreciate that. To answer the question quickly, I like what Chair Stevens said, that we're trying to continue business as usual. Obviously, some of our work with the Mulberry Corridor has been delayed, but just because of other priorities related to COVID, and also the lack of ability to, you know, exercise community engagement as we've been going through it. But it is, Mulberry has been slowed down slightly, probably by a couple of months. And I think Kristen's point about 6-month planning calendar, I don't think it's currently on our 6-month, but I would say, Mike, to answer your question, we're probably 60 to 90 days behind on where we thought we'd be, but that's a conversation that's resourced and funded, and so we're going to continue forward with our fiscal impact work and our community engagement work. Hope that helps.
Hey, Darren.
Thanks, Darren.
Darren, this is Tom. It's on our planning calendar for PFA for October, and I guess we will just keep that there till we hear more and see where we are.
Yeah, Mike Beckstead has been working on that. I'm actually going to talk to him later today, Tom. So I'll try and get a more precise understanding of the actual delay and see if it affects the October date, and then I'll let you know. I might even be able to find it out before our meeting is over today, our PFA meeting.
Okay.
Thanks, Darren. Anything, excuse me, anything else on the planning calendar? Okay, we'll move to the consent agenda. We can discuss these items, or we can, have a motion. I don't know if anybody would like to discuss these items before we vote on them, but we have the meeting minutes on the consent agenda, the Pulse Point marketing grant appropriation, and the emergency medical services contract renewal.
I'd make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Okay.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion on these items? Okay, seeing none. All in favor, say aye.
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 Okay, motion passes. So the consent agenda is approved. Is there any other follow-up that anybody has on the consent agenda items?
I will just follow up on we talked last month about the EMS thing, and that's a work in progress, and we continue to work with that, and especially in this COVID phase. The other thing really, though, is the good news item on bilingual pulse point awareness and CPR training. I think that's a good news item. Again, as we celebrate being one of the communities with the highest save rate for cardiac arrest in the nation, this is just another step to reinforce that and make CPR available to more folks throughout the community. So that's a good news item.
That is a good news item. Thank you for reminding us about that, Tom. Anything else? Any other questions or comments on the consent agenda that we just passed? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the staff report, and that's Fort Collins 911 dispatch update.
All right, I'll open this up for Chief Swoboda and for Rena to give us a report at our, trying to remember the last time we were all together, which I think was February, at our February meeting. Darren asked that we bring Rena and Jeff in to talk about things that they're doing in dispatch, and Chief Sims is here as well, and he's our dispatch liaison, and Chief Waters here, he works closely with them as well. The call processing from when someone calls and we learn that a call is critical is a big component of response time. We can only drive so fast, and we have Opticom, we can control the intersections and stuff, but that call processing and getting our folks turned out, getting them in the fire engines to respond are big. And we're working on, with the new CAD system coming on, which they will discuss, and with the new station alerting system coming on, we hope to improve our response times. And I'm gonna, before I introduce them, I'm gonna turn it to Chief Sims real quick to talk about our response times, and then why they show a bit of a deficit right now. And then I'll have him turn it over to them since he works closely with Rena. Chief.
Good morning, everybody. My voice is a little bit raspy because I smoked chicken wings yesterday, and apparently I'm allergic to smoke. So, yeah, wrong career choice.
Yeah.
Anyways, the community risk assessment standard of cover that you all went over and adopted in February, and then also with the annual report that we'll be discussing in June with the council combined in the Poudre Valley Fire Protection District Board, we have shown an increase in our overall response times in the urban area. And it's really a twofold reason. The first is tied to the urban area growing to meet to the size of the Fort Collins growth management area that went, and so our urban designation went from roughly 48 square miles to 77 square miles. And the second component is a bit of an increase in our call processing times, which Rena and Chief Swoboda are going to discuss today. We knew that was going to happen with our call processing times. In 2015, we went away from emergency medical dispatching. We went to, a matter of fact, we experimented a couple times with address, nature, send. So very limited information that the responders would have before they got in the rig and jumped in and took off, all the way through to kind of a modified questioning system. The emergency medical dispatch, and as you know, about roughly 65 to 66% of the calls that we respond to are tied to medicals, but the EMD is a national protocol that LEDA provides, and the dispatchers ask a series of questions to actually designate and triage the call, as well as start information, start care prior to responders responding. So we went back to EMD and send in March of 2019. And so we had been measuring all emergent calls, anything from code 3 Bravo, which is a lower end call, up to an Echo Medical, which is a high end call. We were measuring and respond emergent. And so now what we're doing, since we've gone back to EMD and send, we've done that strategically to right size our response, just like Fort Collins PD has. And we're working with dispatch to actually pull out and be able to stratify our measurements, sort of like what they've done with the priority 1 calls. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rena. She's got a wonderful presentation, and then I can maybe clarify a few things for us and how we work together with dispatch after she's completed. So
Actually, Chief Svoboda just let me know that he's going to kick it off. So
okay, sorry.
Over to you.
No, thanks for having us. I'm just going to give a brief overview of what we're doing and kind of why we're doing it, and then Rena's going to go through the nuts and bolts and the great work that she's done in addition to our patrol unit. So just so everyone understands, we have a goal of 5.5 minutes for priority 1 response times. The most important calls from the time we answer the phone call till the time an officer is on scene is 5.5 minutes. We came up with that number based on our benchmark cities, which are 29 other cities that we report on statistics. They have about a 5-minute, I think it's 40-second response time. We want to be a little bit better than our benchmark. So we made it 5:30. In years past, we hadn't been anywhere close. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And Rena will go through some of that. But what I kept hearing the answer is we need more people. And while more people definitely will help with that, it's not the only way in which we can reduce our response time. So we really looked at what are priority 1 response calls. Do officers know what those are, and are we that, those are the ones that we are counting? But then even more so, from the time someone calls us, what are the steps we take from a dispatcher answering the phone to getting it in the system to an officer en route? And we look at each one of those. And Rena's done a great job with our patrol division to, on every single call, we look and say, we met our time. We might be there 5 minutes and 20 seconds, but it took us 2 minutes to enter that call. Why is that? Let's go back and look at it. And so the good thing is we only have about, 1 priority call every 2 days or so. It's really not that many. If we were having dozens a day, this would be difficult, but we're able to go through every single call and look at it. And so it's a work in progress. We're continuing to, how we count them, why we are counting which ones. And then also, again, some of them that used to be priority 1 calls, we say, you know what, we don't want our officers driving emergent to get there. Those are no longer the most important things we do. So this has just been a work in progress, and we're continuing to drive these numbers down, and it's working very well. And that's a lot, to Rena's leadership, and Assistant Chief John Fain have been working on this. So I'll turn it over to Rena to kind of go through what is a priority 1 call and how do we count these and why do we count these. But this is a good news item, but obviously, still 5 minutes from the time you pick up the phone because you need help is an eternity. And so we know that. And so we're just going to continue to drive those down as best we can. Rena, it's all yours.
Thank you, Chief. Share my screen here. Good morning, everybody. I am so happy to be here with you this morning. I see so many familiar faces, people I haven't seen in so long. So happy to be with you here this morning, and just want to reiterate the strong working relationship and collaboration that I have so appreciated between PFA and Fort Collins Police. We continue to have that strong relationship and collaboration, and I couldn't be happier about that. So appreciate that collaboration. So what I have for you today are just a few slides explaining our priority 1 call process on the law enforcement side and how we analyze those calls in terms of our response time target. Then I'll give you a quick update on our CRIS project, and then turn it over to Chief Sims again to talk about a new feature and more information about station alerting that we'll be getting with our new system. So in analyzing our priority 1 calls, we do have strategic alignment to one of our outcome areas, and that is safe community. Safe community measurement 1 is our response time to priority 1 calls, and that's our average response time to priority 1 calls. It does measure our response to our most critical calls. It is an expected level of core law enforcement service to respond to these calls in a timely and safe manner. So again, as Chief explained a little bit, our overall average, our goal and target is to maintain an overall average of 5 minutes and 30 seconds from call creation to an officer arriving on scene. And I'll talk a little bit about those phases and what goes into all those phases here in a second. And our target is derived from a benchmark city comparison. So here's a list of our priority 1 calls on the law enforcement side. We have burglaries in progress, kidnappings, robberies, our sentinel alarms, any shootings, Sierra activations. Sierra activations are when tags are moved inside of a bank, and so we get alerted on those. And then stabbings. So it's important to remember these are calls that can, when they come into our center, they default automatically to a priority 1. And depending on what's going on, they can be downgraded and often are, but circumstances have to warrant that downgrade. However, any call that comes into our 911 center can be upgraded to a priority 1 if the circumstances warrant. So this is a list of our calls that default to a 1, but it's important to remember we can make anything that comes into our center a priority 1, depending on what's going on, and we often do upgrade. So we do have 5 timestamps that we measure as part of this analyzation of our priority 1 calls. Our first timestamp that we measure is creation. So you'll often hear this referred to as hello to hello. That first hello is creation. And that is when a call entry mask is opened by the call taker. That's when the time starts on that priority 1 call. On any 911 call, that is automatic. So that means when the call is received on a 911 workstation, it automatically starts that call mask, and that's when the call time starts on that call. The next phase is entered, and that is when that call is entered by a call taker and the information is sent via our computer system to the dispatcher. The dispatcher then quickly deciphers the information and dispatches that call. So 3 important phases here: creation to dispatched. And we have worked a lot with our 911 center in getting these calls from creation to dispatch in a quick manner. We've just started measuring creation to dispatch this year, so we're actually not only measuring this whole phase, but we're starting to measure parts of this phase as well. And that aligns really well with what Chief Sims is doing with the 911 center. They're starting to do that kind of work as well with priority 1 calls on the PFA side. So once it's dispatched, officers will then route themselves to the call. They can either do that on their MDT by pressing a button, or they can air that information if they're unable to safely do that on their MDT, and we will place them en route. The last timestamp that we measure is on scene. This is when an officer arrives at the call for service, and they can either, again, press their on scene button on their MDT. They often air that information because these calls are volatile, so they really often don't have time to just arrive themselves on their MDT. They'll just air that information and we quickly put them on scene. So again, this is hello to hello, the 5 timestamps that we measure as part of a priority 1 call. And you'll see the arrows here between each phase is our overall average for 2019 between each phase on how long it took us to process that call between each phase. And then our overall average for 2019 for creation to on scene, so from hello to hello, was 5 minutes and 9 seconds. Keeping in mind our target was 5:30. So we did really well for 2019. This next slide is actually my favorite slide because it does show all the work that's gone into our priority 1 call analyzation over the past few years. So if you look at 2017, we had 267 calls. We were way above our target. 2018, we came down a little, but still above our target. In 2019, we were, again, at 5 minutes and 9 seconds below our target. And if you look at the drastic number of reduced calls, I'll talk a little bit about the reasoning for that. And it's all about data. So 3 things that I think really are a testament to this, really progress on us meeting our target. First, it's really a testament to the work on the dispatch and the patrol side. We have really put an intentional focus on talking about these calls, analyzing these calls, and talking about our target. So it's a huge testament to the work done on both of those sides. I can't say enough about how much they've taken ownership of these calls. They talk about them, they talk to each other about them. My favorite part of all this is often I'll get an email from a dispatcher saying, hey, look at this call on your report for tomorrow. Look at we got there in 3 minutes. Look how great we did. And so when I first started getting those emails, something clicked and I thought, you know, it's working. This focus and this constant conversation about these calls is working. And the same thing is happening with Assistant Chief John Fayen on the patrol side. You know, they're constantly talking about these and how we can improve. So I think that just shows a little bit about, this graph talks a little bit about that hard work that's gone into that. Another thing that has helped with our number of calls is upgrading and downgrading. So when we were downgrading or not really counting a call because it got downgraded, I feel like we weren't always taking those out of our data set. So I think we've really had an intentional focus on if a call is downgraded, and often that happens. So something can start out very volatile and, you know, a lot of things are going on and we dispatch officers, but a suspect leaves or it's not what we thought it was, or a situation completely changes. We downgrade that call. And once that call is downgraded, it's no longer counted as part of our priority one call process because it has been downgraded. And so that has really cut down on the number of calls because we are actually not counting those anymore. And that's important, and that only comes with daily analyzation, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Also, the conversely could happen as well as far as upgrading. So when we start out a call and it's not a routine call, but it's a priority 3 or priority 2, and we get information that something has changed, a weapon has been pulled out, or someone starts fighting, or someone has assaulted someone, we will upgrade that call. And what we weren't really doing, I think, consistently in the past was counting our priority 1 response time from the point of upgrade to on scene. So because the call was upgraded after creation, we should be counting our response time from the time the call was upgraded to the time on scene, because that's when it became a priority 1. So that's really helped in the analyzation of the data as well. And the last leg of this is just, the chief alluded to this a little bit, but we analyze these calls every day. So we get less than 1 a day. Every morning I send an email to our executive staff advising what priority 1 calls we had for the prior day and how we did on those calls. And if we had no calls, I send an email saying we had no calls. So every day the executive staff of the police department knows how we did the day prior for priority 1 calls, and if we met our target or if we didn't have any calls at all. So it's that constant awareness and it's that daily evaluation and digging into these calls every day. And if one call that we get in a day is above 5 minutes and 30 seconds, we immediately analyze that call. Assistant Chief John Fain analyzes the radio traffic. I analyze the dispatch side to see how we did from creation to dispatch, if we were over or under where we should be. And so that daily analyzation has really helped with that. So those are the slides that I have for you today. And quickly, just want to give an update on our CRIS project. We are cutting over to our new system on September 15th. And work continues to take place to make sure that we have a smooth cutover for that. And that's a new CAD system, record system, jail system, and mobile solution for police officers and people in the field. And we have been working very collaboratively with Mark Reagan and Doug Miller to ensure that everything from the dispatch side and PFA side is smooth for our cutover. And we have continued collaboration with all of our other partner agencies in the area. So station alerting is something that we will be implementing with our new system, and it's very exciting. We're very excited about it on the dispatch side. This is once a CAD incident has basic information entered, the system will automatically send a computerized dispatch to responding units over the radio system. So it saves a lot of time on the response side, as well as on the dispatch side. Usually they're having to air that information and do all their radio work and be over here and give medical directions on the phone. So they're literally having to multi-focus and multitask. So this is a great technology that we're implementing. And I will turn it over to Chief Sims for more information on that, as well as some collaboration that we've been doing on PFA's priority 1 calls. Chief Sims.
Thank you, Rena. That was fantastic. So I work very closely with Carol Workman, the communications manager, and also with Amy Huff, who is an administrative supervisor, and as of right now, Hellier Arvizo, who's administrative supervisor. And we work very closely, not only on our response time measures with call processing, but also on the PFA side, we have a form that crews can fill out when they have a question about dispatch or if they need something clarified. And those come to me, and then we work together to collaborate, listen to tape, go through it, make sure that both our personnel, responders, as well as the dispatchers have a clear understanding of what happened on the calls and kind of how to move forward to improve the system. So continuous improvement there. The relationship over the last year and a half has just gotten better and better and better, even to the point where on some really tragic, hard incidents, we've had our officers, captains, when a little boy was hit at Lopez Elementary this last year. We had captains reach out to dispatch to make sure that they were doing okay because it was such a traumatic call. And I think that's just a testament to the teamwork and the collaboration that we have, and the feeling that our view, PFA's view, is that the call starts to be, it really starts to be handled at dispatch. The response begins there. So just like Rena said, we measure our response times exactly the same. We look at call processing, we look at turnout, and then we look at travel. And our goal in the urban area is 90% of the time, we want to try to arrive on scene in 6 minutes and 20 seconds. The goal there is that right now, 1 minute and 20 for the call processing side, 1 minute for turnout, and 4 minutes for travel. And just like Chief Swoboda said, you can attack that by throwing lots of stations, lots of engines on the street, lots of personnel. But you really need to get in there and figure out how you can improve in all 3 areas. What we have done in the past is we've looked at all emergent calls, this big bucket, which Fort Collins PD, when Rena said priority 1, priority 2, and priority 3, all those would be measured for that response time. And I'm working with Amy Huff, and I'm working with her. We're looking at really our structure fires right now and echo medicals, which echo medicals are the worst medical that somebody is being reported as the not breathing and possibly in cardiac arrest. Those are the 2 that we're going to look at as our priority 1 calls. And then we'll have Delta medicals, Charlie medicals, other emergent calls kind of in that priority 2 bucket. And we're going to work to stratify those and do time measurements on all of them. And so we just, and Kirsten, if you could share your screen to show that form that I sent you, if you have it. I'm sorry, I emailed it to you a little bit ago because I'm on my phone.
Okay, Ron, one moment. Let me see. I wasn't paying attention to my email.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Well, Kirsten's pulling that up, and we're still, as I've said many times in these meetings, we're still the only folks in town that says fire on the door. So those are still our priority 1 calls as well. And there's in that space, and I think Dave will appreciate this, in that space of response time, there's nothing that responds faster to fire than an automatic sprinkler system. And that helps our response time as well. And that lets us take a priority 1 fire call down to a lower priority in following that up and making sure the fire is extinguished. It can change our response. So on the suppression side, there's that priority 1 essence as well. Back to you, Ron.
Yes, sir. So this is the data for Fort Collins 911 with PFA calls, structure fires, and echo medicals. And just like what Rena showed in her presentation, we are looking at basically 1 minute for the hello to, I'm sorry, I have a hard time seeing it. But we have the minute 20 goal is 1 minute for the dispatcher to receive the call and create. We have a 20-second or an 8-second goal to select, and then 20 seconds to get that dispatched on the fire side. That 20 seconds on the goal will be taken out when we move to call or the automatic dispatching and station alerting. The system itself will automatically do that. It will no longer be a manual process. So we're hopeful for that 20-second improvement right away when we move to that system. And then we're going to continue to dig into the calls, just like Rena said, and figure out in all aspects, how do we continue to improve to make sure that on our most critical calls we're meeting our time benchmarks. And just like Chief said, we've started with the echo medicals and the structure as a starting point. We'll move into all other fires. We'll analyze Delta medicals along with EMS, our EMS division. The new system will be able to stratify Delta medicals by priority code. I'm not going to get into the details on that, but we'll be able to select certain Delta medicals that'll be in that place as well. So we're super excited about the opportunities with the new station alerting. You saw on the Fort Collins police side, the turnout, that their average was 11 seconds. Our 90th percentile on turnout, particularly on structure fires, can be upward of a minute and 43 seconds. So average and 90th percentile are a little bit different. Average is kind of that the middle point. The 90th percentile says 90% of the time we can meet this goal. And so that's the kind of the difference too between response profile of being in the vehicle and ready to respond versus being in a station and or out doing other things. So those are, turnout is something that we'll continue to work on. And then the travel time is where the units come in. And we're really focused on the travel time with not just building more stations, more units, but that's where the RAMs really come in too, is to take some of those lower priority calls out of the system and keep those big units ready to respond on the emergency side. So wonderful collaboration, strong work, and I really appreciate Fort Collins PD's focus on making response times front and center for the entire organization. I agree, that is the key to doing this. And that's part of our standard of cover compliance process that we covered with you when we made that presentation in February. We are working with Chief Vandervelde, the captains, Haley Spurrier is our data analyst, and Laura Robinson, our GIS analyst, and the Deccan software. Is we want to get this type of information in front of our crews on a consistent basis, looking at it daily, so that Chief Andy knows where we're at, I know where we're at, the shift BCs know where we're at, the captains know where we're at. We're going to build that into we have station dashboards that'll display that. We want to create competition amongst engine companies and crews for improvement, not for to do things safely, but that's where we're going to continue to move with improving response times. So I'll just turn it over for any questions, or Chief Dement, if you have anything to add. I will turn it over to you, sir.
I think questions is a good time for that. And like I said, just so the board is aware, the dispatch software that we have, the computer aided dispatch, and it's simultaneously virtually. We're also working on installing our station alerting system. So that's when the dispatcher has enough information, they can either push the button or it will grab it and it'll start with an electronic voice, start dispatching our stations. So that call processing, because one of the things that the police department has over us is they are dynamically positioned around the community where we are statically positioned. And if it's a fire call, we do have to, and now with medical, we have protective equipment that we have to don before we respond, so that when we arrive on scene, our firefighters are ready to engage. So that takes up a little more time in that call processing, and that's what we refer to as our turnout time. That's not just the time to get from the day room or the training room to the apparatus, but it's also time to don to gear. And that has a finite level of how fast we can do that. And now as we're donning more medical gear, that takes up some time too. So anything we can do to shave seconds off of that is going to help us in the long run. So are there any questions from the board?
Anyone have any questions?
I have a question. Tom and Jeff, first of all, this is awesome work. Rena, it's great to see this going on in our community. And on medicals anyway, I'm wondering if we're also working with the ambulance service to improve their response time.
I will defer that to Chief Waters, who can respond to that, or Chief McLean, working on the medical side. They are more dynamically positioned as well. But Chief McLean, I see you turned on your video. Can you respond to that, or Chief Waters?
Sure, Chief, I'm happy to address it. We use all of this data that comes out of FC 911, out of the CAD, and Bill Salmon is really in charge of compliance for the ambulance response metrics. So we have a monthly report that is generated that Bill and I review extensively. as well as with Chief McLean and representatives from UCH EMS, where we measure all of the intervals that Rena talked about, as well as those that are similar to those that Chief Sims talked about as well, to measure ambulance response from different areas in the city. And we're constantly working to improve those in areas where we think there are efficiencies that can be realized. Moving forward with the new CAD, we're very excited about the ability to have greater stratification of the severity of EMS calls, which will allow us to use units like the RAM more efficiently and apply the things that we've learned in that project into ambulance response as well.
Well, Kevin, do they have a goal? Like police has a goal of 5:30 and ours is 6:20. What's their goal?
Their goal is the goal that we created for them inside the ambulance contract. And so that is different depending upon which zone of the city they're responding to.
And zone one for the EMS contract matches exactly the urban zone for PFA. We worked closely, if you guys remember, we worked very closely with EMS compliance and the EMS battalion on that to make sure that we had an apples to apples comparison for how we're doing in the urban and how UC Health is doing in the priority 1 zone.
And what is their zone 1 time?
I'll have to look it up, Chief.
Awesome.
Any other questions?
Well, this is great. This is great work. Thank you all.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I want to say that this partnership, we are, and Chief Swoboda and I have had this conversation since he came here about over the past 2 BFO cycles, and BFO's changed, of course, with COVID, but we have contributed funds to add additional dispatchers because we know that staffing in there is part of that priority. And one of the things that our end goal, just like it is for the police department, when they go on those priority 1 calls where there's a potential for an officer being in danger, we also want to have that same thing from when our firefighters are in danger, that we have sufficient staffing on your end to make sure that if someone calls a mayday, that is heard and received. And they do a great job. When we get our major working incidents, that we get a dispatcher that's dedicated to that, but we're working to make sure to ensure that more in a rote mechanism, that it's just part of the dispatch thing. It's going to take us a while to get there, but we're partnering together. We have a great partnership. Chief Sims does a great job. Chief Waters, Chief McLean, all our battalion chiefs work closely with dispatch to make sure that we get to the customer as fast as we can. That's an input. Again, it's how proficient we are at our services when we arrive. Response time we see as an input or an output even, but the outcomes are still, still ties back to our training and those built-in fire protection features on the fire side of things, and citizen that comes from the CPR side. The more citizens we can have engaged and prepared in CPR, or even, we've recognized dispatchers for teaching people how to do CPR. We've had cops do CPR. This is a community event to get us to where, like I said, I'm very proud of that benchmark that we're one of the safest communities in the country to have a cardiac arrest. That's all from everybody working together. So thank you, Rena. Thank you, Chief.
And Ken, did you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, I was just wondering, because you're talking about response times relative to, some national standards, peer cities, however that is. What about the various segments of that response? Are there, guidelines or comparisons, there? I know that Chief Swoboda, mentioned in terms of looking at an overall call and then, looking at various phases of that. I mean, I was just wondering if there, if there's some comparisons that take place between some of those, peer cities or standards relative to that, initial calls, dispatched, travel time, et cetera, down through those 4 or 5 stages there, or 3 or 4 stages, whatever it was. is there anything there that kind of serves as where improvements could be made, or is that just all internal?
Yeah, I'll let Rena answer. If you're asking how long should it take to get a call entered, how long should it take to get it dispatched, and comparing that 30 seconds in a minute type of calls?
Yeah. I mean, and I don't know if there is, if the, standard that we're kind of measuring ourselves against is just an overall standard. I guess number one, is that an overall standard, or do some of those standards are they broken down?
Rena, do you know? Because my understanding is just the overall hello to hello.
Yes, thanks, Chief. So in Fort Collins, we have just started measuring in 2020 creation to dispatch time. So from that first hello to how long it takes us to dispatch that. When we talk to our benchmark cities, there's not a specific target right now that's established, but it is reported in our benchmark report. So we have always been reporting that. It's up to us to develop our target just based on what we see from everyone else. So for our benchmark cities, the average call receipt to dispatch time was 1 minute and 29 seconds.
Okay.
So we have established in Fort Collins, we've talked about 1 minute 30. We've talked about 2 minutes. I think 2 minutes is a little long. That if it takes 2 minutes, there's some sort of language barrier or belligerent caller, alcohol and drugs going on. So there's some sort of barrier there. So for our measurements so far for the year through, looks like, and how we sit for May, we're at 1 minute and 43 right now for our average for creation to dispatch, and 1 minute 39 is our median. So we're tracking that through this year. I think at the end of this year, we're gonna probably need to get together and say, do we want to establish a target or do more work on that creation to dispatch? And then Assistant Chief John Fain and I will also work from en route to arrival to see if we need to work on anything there. But it is reported with our benchmarks. There's just not targets established. So we just go by what the average is for the year.
Okay. All right. No, that's helpful. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Thanks,
You bet.
Ken. Darren has a question or a comment he'd like to make. So Darren, go ahead.
Yeah, I do. Thank you, Kristen. And thanks, Chief and Rena and Ron. This is a discussion that I've been talking to the chief about, being at the board meeting here for a little while. And I think it's, the way I look at this part of our business for PFA is it's all part of the supply chain of delivering, high quality services. And if there's a breakdown at the hello level, then regardless of how the work, the professionalism or excellence it's delivered at, on scene, this is such a critical part of our supply chain and in providing, world-class municipal services and fire services and emergency services. And I love the question Dave asked about UC Health as well, because that partnership between fire and police and ambulance is just so critical. And so I guess my comment is, I've been telling this story about Chief and Rena, for well over a year, and they may not even do this anymore. But I will tell you, as a fire authority, I think it's really good for us to know that if there's a type 1 call that occurs, and someone in Rena's position is walking down the hall talking to the police chief about, like, in real time, that's what we did, that was, here's what we could have learned, or man, maybe instead of 5 minutes and X seconds, it was 2 minutes and 15 seconds. And how did that happen? And how can we replicate that? You two, I don't know if you walk down the hallway anymore when you get a type 1 call, but for me, that was really symbolic of the fact that we are managing and really, really working with partners like, well, in this case, I'm now PFA board member, but it gives me a lot of confidence that our partners who are delivering these communication services, 911, and that they're having that level of a conversation when these things occur, that it's not in a quarterly report or a monthly report, something like that. So I think for the PFA board, because you don't get a lot of time with Chief Swoboda anytime, or with Rena, I want you to be extremely confident in this part of our supply chain, because as city manager and as it relates to police services, I love the work that they're doing and the professionalism and the expertise that, in particular, Rena and her team bring to this work. But it's such a critical part of our supply chain as a PFA, as the PFA, and I'm, I get to see the relationship between the two chiefs and Ron and Kevin and Ryan and all those folks. And the more we can do to encourage greater collaboration and systems thinking and data driven, I think the better off we'll be. But I'm really proud of this part of our supply chain. And I feel like it was really important for the board to hear from these two who are delivering this on behalf of PFA. So I'm really appreciate the work you guys are doing. And Tom, you and your team as well. I don't mean to, I mean, I could be as complimentary and as appreciative because I think and it's not just blowing smoke. I think we've got really some of the nation's best people on these issues and support at the systems level so we can do this stuff. So that's it. No questions. Thankful for the work.
Thank you. Thank you, Darren. Yeah, and thank you, Rena and Chief Swoboda. I appreciate the update and the work that you're doing to continually improve this process. And so it's very impressive, and we're really happy about it. I just have one question. So Rena, you mentioned language barriers that could be one of the things that can slow things up. How do you deal with that? I mean, I'm assuming that you have bilingual staff, but in a university community, you might be dealing with a myriad of different languages. And so how does that work when you're dealing with somebody who might have a language barrier?
You bet. Thank you for the question. So when we do have someone that's non-English speaking, we often do have someone on staff, and mostly it's a need for Spanish. Mm-hmm. We have a couple of people that are fluent in Spanish, and so when that person's working, they're a valuable resource, and we get them right on the phone. And they actually have to be certified to also give medical directions in Spanish, and we have one person that is certified to do that. And the medical directions also appear in Spanish on our software. So that is a great tool. If we don't have anyone on staff, and if it's another language that our staff doesn't speak, we do have access to a language line that we utilize quite often. So it's an immediate transfer to a language line. We advise what language we need, and we're usually online with an interpreter within 10 to 20 seconds. So it's very quick, but it does cause that delay in that creation to dispatch. It just adds to those seconds. So language barrier is often some of those times where you see something above 1 minute and 30 or close to 2 minutes, or sometimes even over 2 minutes. There was some sort of language barrier. And if you add sometimes uncooperative callers or drugs and alcohol on top of all that, it can even add more. So
sure. No, that's great to know that you have that resource to be able to, and that it's so quick with that. Was curious about that, and I think it's good for people to know why there are calls that just might take a little bit longer. And I'm sure dealing with difficult, or maybe even dealing with maybe a younger child that can't really explain things, I assume, and very well, or where they are, or any kind of things like that. So
I focused on the negative there a little bit. Yes, you're right. Sometimes it is just someone, to no fault of their own, they're in crisis, or it is a young child, or very much so. So all over the spectrum.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Any other? Go ahead, sir. Oh, okay. Any other questions or comments?
Thank you.
Thank you guys for being here.
Thank you. Yeah.
Stay safe.
You as well. Thank you.
Okay. So we will. That was a great presentation. I think it's great for us to understand as a board, how that process works, because I think we're not always keyed into that, and how much is involved with making those calls happen and getting to a place in 5 or 6 minutes. So good for us to remember that.
And if I could remind, since this is the authority board, if I could just remind everyone, that is part of the IGA, and we have actually contributed dispatchers, but it was part of the original intergovernmental agreement, and continues to be, is that dispatch services are part of the in-kind contribution that the city provides. So it's that partnership that makes the authority strong, and gives us that collaboration with police department, with EMS as well, and with dispatch, and it's been working well for 40 years. They listen to our concerns. They implement the procedures we ask for. They work very well with us, all the way from Chief Svoboda and Rena to the dispatchers that are working with our folks on the street. So we're very grateful for that.
Fantastic. All right, so we'll move on to the next staff report, which is the COVID-19 response update.
Okay, I'm going to kick this off. Since and we've been keeping you up to date at our board meetings on our COVID response, and we still are seeing just a slight downward trend in the overall number of calls as we start reintegrating parts of our economy and stuff. We'll be watching that to see if those come back as well. And Chief Vandervelde and Ann put this together. I'm going to go over it briefly and see if they have any comments, but well, I know they will, but we stood up an incident management team on March 25th. And our goal has been to follow those, as Ken was asking about dispatch, is to follow those standards, because this is a new practice. This is something that, this is the first time we've really had a pandemic hit us with these kind of numbers where, globally, millions of people are impacted, and you really can't tune into another country that doesn't have some kind of impact with this. So following the CDC, the CDPHE, Larimer County Health, and working with our partners, with the city and with the county to implement those things that impact not only the community, but our responders as well. So we implemented dispatch protocols. We also did things to protect our personnel. We also did things to protect the community from our personnel. We kind of changed how we responded to nursing homes, so that if we had somebody that could possibly be carrying the disease, that we would work hard not to take that into those places. Our PPE, we went into this with a good supply of PPE. Our supply of PPE remains excellent at this time, and we are tracking that and projecting into the future, making sure that we have adequate PPE for our folks. And we've implemented things in the stations, and for our firefighters that are watching, we're very appreciative and empathetic to them, because they work a 48-hour shift. And so we all know from our masking procedures, when we go out into stores and to shop and to have meetings and stuff, they're working a 48-hour shift. And many of those hours are wearing those masks in the stations, working hard to stay socially distanced. And firefighters are very social creatures in their very being. And we appreciate what they've done to help limit the spread amongst our people. And we're happy to report that we had 3 firefighters early in this that tested positive, and we continue to test people that are symptomatic, but we haven't found any other positive cases since that time. A little knock on the wood. And then we've been working on the HR side of things. We've added benefits, changed some policies to make sure that we can stay staffed and keep our folks healthy. We've even made it a possible, and we've had a few folks use it when there's a possible exposure. We found it pretty economical to offer up a hotel room where folks can stay if they needed to for the night or two or whatever they needed, till we got any kind of exposures chased down, so that they wouldn't possibly taking something to their family. So we're thinking about the families as well. And one of the things that continues, we had one, just a big shout out to staff, is Sunday morning over a Memorial Day weekend. Staff was in meetings from about 7 a.m. till about 9:30, quarter till 10, on just the next phase of how we carry this thing out. And on their holiday weekend, all the BCs, the DCs, the senior leadership team were involved in that, just to make sure that we are planning this in the right phase and getting everyone's input. And that next phase is the loosening of some of those standards on our, I won't say loosening, just changing some of those standards on response. And Chief Vandervelde can address some of those, but I just want to open up with those things. We're working hard to stay abreast of the COVID, the changes that are happening with it, the things we're learning, from the health department. I don't speak to Tom Gonzalez as frequently as Darren, but staying in close contact with the health department. And Chief Waters has done just an outstanding job of staying in touch with the health department as well as our healthcare providers at Banner and UC Health on how to get testing done and stuff. So staff has done a great job of keeping up with this and moving forward. So Chief Vanderbilt, do you have anything to add to that?
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I'd like to just, well, first of all, I'd like to go back one staff report and just coming from a different agency and recognizing the working relationship that the PFA has with FCPD and dispatch. It truly is that professional and collaborative relationship is very special, and it doesn't happen everywhere. So sometimes we take that for granted here. I just want to recognize them, and that working relationship is just so special. So, but with the COVID response, first I want to recognize all of our personnel, from the chief to our newest firefighter. Everyone's gone above and beyond, and during this pandemic, and from things like sharing our PPE. We do have enough, and we've have the opportunity to share ours with Timnath PD, FCPD, and even when Holyoke Hospital was critically low on N95s, we were able to share some of ours with them. So I think our pre-planning on this, it truly started about a month before we even had a positive case here in our jurisdiction. So I think that was a testament to our people and what we've done in preparation and our planning and all of this. So, and really our, from our response, some of the changes we're looking at, or some of the, change in how we're responding. So we're not going to stage on 5A calls. So we called, the COVID calls. We still will wear the proper PPE, protect each other, expecting every encounter that it could be a positive, somebody could be positive. So we want to make sure that our personnel are protected, and with three people testing positive in our system in this throughout this entire time, I think is a success story to one, our PPE, two, our personnel that are following the procedures that have been set in front of them and really doing a great job of doing that. And then another thing I'd just like to hit on or touch on is that our incident management team and just work tirelessly and making sure that we're all following safe and recognized practices. So I'd just like to kind of say from logistics, Chief McLean, Chief DeBar, that logistics is kind of a thankless position, and it's probably one of the hardest positions to do because you're trying to keep everybody in PPE, in equipment, in cleaning supplies. So it's very difficult, and they're just doing a fantastic job along with their team. Our planning team is Chief Butler and Chief Patterson, and again, that's one of those keeping the cats herded. That they're really doing a great job in making sure we're having everything out there, putting out the incident action plan. The operations chiefs, Chief Garcia and Chief Sims, are in touch with our BCs in line every day, just making sure everything's going good. What do they need? I can't say enough about Chief Waters. He's probably hasn't had a day off since probably early part of March, late February. And he's just taking care of us like no other. Chief DeMint's leadership and support and guidance, we couldn't do it without him. So, but just kind of want to say, if we have to face a 100-year pandemic, this is the team I'd want to face it with. So they're doing a great job. That's all I got, boss.
Thank you. Then financially, I'm going to set this up for Ann, who is working on the phone on our executive session right now. But financially, we're working close. Ann has been meeting with Travis Dornan with the city. I've been participating, although, and Darren can validate this, I'm an optional participant in the BFO process, but I'm going to keep my ear to the ground on what the financial ramifications are as we continue to move forward and learn more financially. And Ann included some stuff in here about Gallagher. Gallagher is coming around again, and since the printing of the board packet, the the Joint Budget Committee and others in the state legislature are having some very serious discussions about running an election, take 2/3 vote in both chambers, but running an election to say goodbye to Gallagher in November, and what that would look like, what that would put the residential assessment rate. We still have a lot of questions. I was in a meeting Friday with state chiefs about that, whether it would stay at 715. And please remember that on the district side, with the help of Local 1945, we've got had the passage of the de-Gallagherization in the district. And so the equivalency of the mill rate in the district is still at 7.2. So the mill rate goes up to keep it at a 7.2, although that was a very minor adjustment, but the adjustments could be as severe as 5.88. Don't think it's going to be quite that bad if the Gallagher stays in force. So a lot is happening on the Gallagher side, which will have less of an impact on the district side since we've gone through that, but on the city side, on the residential side of the property tax, that's where we get a significant portion of our funding. And then of course the sales tax impacts. But other than that, I'll turn it over to Ann. We're doing some modeling as far as any kind of personnel things. It's a really, really hard conversation to have. Don't like them, but it's the realities of going through a major recession. So as we appear to be entering. So Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Tom. There's, in a lot of ways, there's really nothing to report because nothing's happened yet, but we're watching what's going to happen. And we're especially concerned about 2021. But right now we're watching very closely the property tax returns coming in from the district. We're watching that on a daily basis. They post their deposits on a daily basis at the treasurer's office. And so we're keeping track of that as they come in. We're thinking we're 5%-ish behind maybe on property taxes for the district, but we'll know a whole lot more by the next board meeting that we have because the deadline for property tax payments is June 15th. And then by then 90%, 95% of the returns that we'll get in 2020 will be in. Typically that's the pattern anyway. There was a delay that the county offered for people to delay paying their property taxes, but they still have to be in by June 15th. So we'll have a much better idea of what we're going to get on the district side. And as Tom noted, we're following along with the city and what their plans are, and are starting to look towards our revenue allocation formula in 2021, and are really concerned about that property tax because that is such a bulk of the funding that we have, of course, from the district, 100%, and a good bunch of the funding from the city is also property taxes. So in a lot of ways, our planning is really about what does the long-term future look like, and how long is the long-term, and how long is the short-term for that matter. So when Tom said we're modeling things about cost reductions in wages, at this point, that's really very theoretical modeling. If we did this, what would that save? We're not talking in any way specifics about furloughs, who, how many, when. We're just at this point putting in place the numbers so that if the time does come and we have to say, okay, pull the trigger, we'll know which triggers we have to work with. And so we'll keep doing that work as we watch the sales tax returns come in and the property tax returns coming in, both at the city and the district, and plan accordingly. And as Tom says, it's hard to do. Nobody wants to talk about it. I heard it described as ghoulish, but it's reality. And when we're 86% people, if we get into a situation where we have to cut significant money, it's the only place we have to go to. Aside from our reserves, which are very healthy, and we're happy about that. And so that'll be part of the whole package that we put together as we see what our shortfalls will be.
And we were fortunate going into this that we had been setting that money aside. We were one-timing money going into the Station 7 that we were holding for another company, which is in your board pack is $915,000 that we were told that we were going to spend one time for Station 7, but that was one, that's ongoing money. Also, we had that placeholder for a deputy chief, which we had hoped to be coming to you this month or next month with a proposal for that. But that provides us significant ongoing money for bracing for the impact. So in addition to freezing some other positions. So I feel we're in the short term, we're really, we're in as good a shape, I'll say it this way, as good a shape as we possibly could be to brace for that impact.
Great. So do we have any questions? Thank you for the presentation. You know, I'm really glad to see the work we're doing with both keeping people safe, you know, keeping our firefighters safe, keeping firefighters' families safe, but also keeping, you know, being conscious of, you know, bringing anything into nursing homes. And we obviously, we've seen really big outbreaks there. So, you know, we are always saying, you know, by wearing masks and protective gear, that it's not only about protecting yourself, but protecting others, right? And so, you know, I think that we've done a great job. I love the flow chart, kind of, there's a lot of, the flow chart that you put in the packet is funny because there's a lot of things that are just like, don't stay at home, right? I mean, you know, if you have symptoms, if you know, if this occurs, just stay home. And I think that that's a really important message to give. And I think, you know, the fact that we only have a few firefighters that have tested positive and that we've been able to keep this under control really shows that we've been using the right protocols and really staying ahead of this. And I think so I thank you for your leadership on that. You know, I think that unfortunately with the budget situation, there is a lot of wait and see, and we're seeing that at the city level too. I mean, we're obviously finding ways in the short term to, you know, hiring freezes and different kinds of things, but some of this is some wait and see. So thank you for the information about Gallagher and that effect. And we will, you know, these are going to be hard conversations as we go forward. And so we're going to try to get through this the best we can. But I thank you for, you know, preparing us for those conversations and working with the city and Travis on what that might look like. So with that, is there anyone else who has a question or a comment that they'd like to?
No, I'll just, you know, thank Ann for the information on Gallagher. I think it's always helpful to review that, see what options are out there. You know, I noticed with that information, also a consideration to try to make an adjustment in the, you know, reassessment cycle. It'll be interesting to see what, you know, what happens, you know, legislatively from that standpoint in addressing Gallagher. And then the other question, have we done, where are we at in terms of our, you know, our reserves? And, you know, I don't know if you want to just kind of provide some information, you know, in some kind of a memo or feedback, but just was wondering where we're at in terms of our reserves for PFA.
Our reserves are in really good shape. We had been planning our reserves with the expectation that KFCG might not be renewed as it was last year. So we had been building up some reserves for that purpose. So we probably have about $10 million of reserves available that are not committed to specific capital projects. They're more in general available for capital needs. And the goal when we didn't know about KFCG was that would carry us for a little while if we lost KFCG funding, long enough to replace that funding somehow. So if there's any silver lining to this, it's that we had been planning for another rainy day, and this is the rainy day we got. So with $10 million, that could very well carry us through through a dip, even a substantial dip. But what it isn't is long-term funding. And so if it's gone, then we don't have it available for capital projects that we had been hoping to be able to do, Station 15 and some other major projects. So we're in good shape there, but it's not a long-term solution. So what happens, how long this recession is going to determine how far those reserves can go.
Okay, I mean, has there been, projection out? I mean, are you thinking like a 2-year horizon or longer, or what's the?
Well, if we say we lost 10% of our funding, that's about $4 million a year, $10 million of reserves. If it's more than that, which could especially be true if Gallagher Tabor doesn't get addressed and the ratchet that they were talking about at the joint budget happens, we could be in a very long-term deficit, and that money wouldn't take us very long.
Yeah. No, I was just trying to think in terms of a 2-year horizon, but if it goes beyond that, it certainly would be problematic. Now, is that 10 million above the Tabor reserve?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Hey, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Any other? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Aaron. Ken, I am so glad you asked the reserve question because I was going to ask it in your honor. Ken has been, as a finance committee member, I think the finance committee has been really, really good, great partner with me and our CFO, Travis. So Mike DiTullio and Dave, if you don't know, when you hear us talk about Travis Stornan, he's been in front of the PFA board, but you may not remember, he's Mike Becksted's successor on an interim basis and has been really leading us through financially. And so I started off with, was going to ask the exact same questions about reserves, and I think and Tom, I think it's a very important question. Obviously, the duration of this crisis is going to determine whether or not reserves become, inevitably at PFA, reserves will be, I think, need to be seen as a really effective tool. The question is, for how long? And Councilmember Summers has been really effective at influencing me. If we have very significant reserves, that we call rainy day funds, and to quote my friend Tom Gendron, this isn't a rainy day, this is a tsunami. This is exactly why we build reserves over the years for this kind of event and smaller event. And I've always been one who's not a big fan of using reserves and spending those down and I don't want to say hoarding those, but keeping them for even a rainier day. But this seems to be the rainiest of days, and if we have another phase of Corona, it's going to be another big giant problem. So I'm I think where Ken is that the use of reserves in this case to help buffer and mitigate direct services, jobs, things like that is really, really important. I would just encourage you to think about in our budgeting, and I've been encouraged to think about the same thing at the city is when we do talk about using reserves, let's also talk about when we replenish those reserves. So that if we're going to use them in this kind of event, which I think is completely appropriate, we also have to be thoughtful about how and when we replenish. So future boards know what the commitment was at that time. So, and then the other thing, Tom, would you mind, or Ann, would you mind just quickly recapping what PFA has done in this short term to contain spending and costs and things like that? Could you just real quickly go over what you've shared before? And I'm mixing up, Tom, whether or not it's you've shared as an executive team member or if you've shared that with the board directly. I just can't. I'm mixing up the two in my mind.
We did share that with the board last time. We've done a hiring freeze. We may come back in the next couple of months on one of the positions that we could get funded from kind of pricing, but we have established a hiring freeze. We have stopped our capital projects at Station 7 and Station 6. We have also, of course, frozen those, like I said, those new positions, conference travel, meals, tuition reimbursement. We are freezing those as well. And what else could we add to that?
Those are the big ones. We've also got did you talk about the $900,000 of money that we had allocated to
Yeah,
Station 7?
Kevin, Darren, that's the other side of that is we've got the ongoing money that we had held for future use. We were spending at one time on Station 7. So that was $915,000 of ongoing money that we were going to spend one time on Station 7 this year. And we were anticipating in 21 or 22 standing up what possibly could have been a third support company, a heavy rescue company, possibly, or another engine company. And so we have that money. We also have 225,000-ish. I can't give you exact numbers, but it's around 2.25 that we had held in ongoing money by the board's request to come back with a proposal for a deputy chief mid-year. So that's ongoing money there as well that we have available. The good news is that that's ongoing money that can help us through that.
And Darren, we talked about previously was that when we went into contract negotiations for our for next year's contract, we conveyed that economic issues was going to be very difficult for 2021. So we're really anticipating that this is going to continue into 2021. So I'm not talking about economic issues there.
Yeah, you guys, I think that's great. Thank you for sharing that. And part of the reason why I do is I think for people who maybe weren't in the last board meeting, that when you say nobody likes to do this, I think setting the context, almost assuming that people, partly if there's been changes, it's good to know that as a board, but also for the people who are, listening and watching, when we talk about tough changes that no one ever wants to make, leaders lose sleep over and shed tears over and think about forever is, some of these changes. I think it's always important to kind of go back and refresh everyone's memory about what we are doing and what you've already done. And I appreciate it. And I know that, Tom, you and your team are committed to that. And I just think it's good to reiterate that at least every board meeting about the status of COVID, the status of our reserves, our spending, and kind of how things are looking. So I appreciate it, and sorry for the redundancy.
Thank you, Darren. Did anybody else want to speak or ask questions about this issue? I don't hear any. Tom, I have a question, and it may or may not really, it probably would relate to the budget, but what do we anticipate for, the fire season for the, wildland fires this summer? What does that look like? Because I know, I've heard people say things like, an emergency on top of an emergency is definitely something that would be hard to prepare for. So what does the season look like for wildfires?
That's a great question, and this weekend gave us a little reprieve in northern Colorado. And there's this little dip in northern Colorado that's not in drought conditions, but the rest of the state is. And if you know, Colorado's system is built on a lot of mutual aid, for lack of a better term, but it's through the Emergency Fire Fund through the state. The governor did move some money into some wildfire areas to be able to stand up some teams, but there's still some state shortages. Also, the governor did approve $2 million last week, signed an executive order. So there'll be one of those 747s or DC-10s in Colorado, and how usable that is in our terrain. In our district, it's probably pretty usable, but in our neighboring districts, as we get into the higher altitudes, that will be interesting. But we're having these meetings frequently at the state level to determine that. If we take more financial impact, there are chiefs saying financially, my budget's going to get hit so hard in those first operational periods. So like that first 24 hours, it's on us. even if we go help our partners. Right now, we're in a position to do that, and we want to do that because, as we learned at High Park, those fires can come into our area. So we definitely need to help them. So the risk right now is pretty seasonal. It is seasonal, I should say. It's what we would normally expect. There's a higher risk in the south. There was an 11,000 acre fire in the southeast part of Colorado over the weekend. A lot of resources were sent to that. We weren't asked, but it's kind of on a week to week evaluation. Is although we got nice moisture over the weekend, that can change pretty rapidly if we go back into a drought pattern. The other things that and we've expressed that to the board before, that we worry about is sending our firefighters on an incident that requires a fire camp. And so it has multiple operational periods, and fire camps are known to have camp crud. It's usually some kind of GI thing or a cold. And now what we worry about, that's being COVID. So one of the things we really want to do is ensure that we have, that we can do some kind of testing for our people before they get deployed to those things. Is what we want to make sure that we can do. So the fire season looks to be normal at this point nationally, which we have a part in that as well. Nationally, they're pretty much the standard setup, but we still don't know what fire camps are going to look like and what's going to happen on that realm as well.
Thank you. Yeah. That's
Tom, if I can, Chris, if I can add, I heard on the radio a couple of days ago that with fire season coming up, there was concerns with travel, just as you've said, travel budgets being reduced and people not wanting their crews to get ill and things like that. Do you, having said all that you just said, Tom, if given the budget crunches that you know are inevitable, if you get a call or whoever in our organization gets a call and says, hey, can you send, 5 people out? How do you feel resourced from a budget standpoint to say, yep, we're sending people, or does your limitation on travel is it affected by that?
The other side of that is, and right now our workforce is healthy, and Chief Butler and Chief Butler, who is our special operations chief now that the board approved in this budget, and he's got a ramp up deployment plan for that. The thing about sending those people away on travel is the reimbursement. We usually come out in the black on those because of the rental time for our equipment, and they pay for the backfill of the people. So it would be a case-by-case evaluation on those deployments, but there is a chance that we could actually gain some revenue by some of those deployments if we have a healthy workforce, if we can manage the COVID thing. So it's a great question, and it's something that we are looking at. So those national deployments, there's pretty good, well, there's an excellent chance of recovering our cost. It's the ones just up Poudre Canyon or out in Weld County and stuff that's going to take us into a couple of operational periods, that first 24 hours, that those become a little harder if we get in a real tight budget crunch. But we have to respond to those. Like I said, if we know they come into our area. That's what we've been telling the state. Is there's a great look at those short operational period neighbor calls. The national thing is we've pretty much over the years have come out in the black on those.
Okay, well that's good, because when I heard that radio bit, what it made me think about is, even in my short time in Fort Collins, how often we've relied on others in our jurisdiction or right next to.
Exactly.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Anyone else? Any other comments? Okay, well, thank you for keeping us updated, and we'll probably just have some updates every month, I imagine, as the situation progresses. So thank you for letting us know what you're doing, and we'll look forward to these conversations in the future. Maybe we won't look forward to them. I mean, they're going to be hard conversations, but we will have them nonetheless. So thank you.
Yes, looking forward, we will have the hard conversations. How's that?
That's right. That's right. We will go on to the seventh item, which is our discussion item, ratification of arbitrator list for collective bargaining.
I'm going to hand this one over to Ann. She's been working with our attorneys on this. This is part of our, we are compelled by the contract to impanel an arbitrator in case negotiations go to an impasse. So Ann, do you have anything to add?
Not a lot to add. It's a pretty simple action, but you had some communication with your attorney about this. And so the action that we're looking for today is for you to ratify the list of arbitrators that have been identified for any possible impasse that we come to in the contract negotiations for the 2021 contract. So we are getting to the very end of the negotiation period. We have 2 more sessions scheduled tomorrow and what day is today? Blur's Day. Today is Blur's Day.
Tuesday, yep.
So on Wednesday and Thursday this week, we have our last 2 sessions of scheduled negotiations. And then at that point, that's when one or the other party could declare an impasse if we don't come to agreement on the items in front of us. So the bargaining agreement that we have right now has the requirements that the board, the PFA board of directors, identifies a list of arbitrators. And if we do go to impasse, then there's a process outlined in the contract for selecting which of the arbitrators, in this case of 3, we would actually use to hear the first part of the impasse process. So those names are in front of you in your materials. John DeFalco, Ruth Robinson, and Marshall Snyder. All 3 of those arbitrators have been contacted and are available and willing to serve if called upon for an impasse. And so what we're looking for from you is a motion to approve that list, and then we'll see how it turns out.
And if I could remind the board real quick, our impasse process is defined by the contract is that it's heard by an arbitrator. The arbitrator makes a ruling if either side is not happy, or both sides. If either side is not happy with that with that ruling, they can take the impasse further on to the voters. And if it's just one party, that party pays for the election. If both parties disagree with it or are not comfortable with the arbitrators and they want to settle it with the voters, then both parties share the cost of that election.
And
this is Mike. Does it appear that you're heading towards an impasse?
This is a normal part of our process. We have to do this identifying the names of the arbitrators. So this doesn't say anything about whether we're going to impasse or not. We do have an executive session scheduled with you at the end of this meeting to talk with our attorney about the ongoing process of negotiations. The other thing that I would mention too, and should have mentioned earlier, was that a part of the process is that just because we reach the point where somebody declares an impasse doesn't mean we have to stop negotiating. So we could schedule an impasse hearing in front of an arbitrator and continue to meet and try and come to agreement before that impasse hearing even happens. So just because an impasse gets declared and the process gets rolling for an arbitrator doesn't mean we have to stop there. We can continue to negotiate.
Great. Any other questions or comments? So we just need a motion to ratify this list.
Also move.
Okay, Mike.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion and a second to ratify the arbitrator list for collective bargaining. Any other comment before we vote? Okay, seeing none, please, all in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, motion passes. So we now have our official arbitrator list. So thank you, Ann.
Kristen, you've got a couple of other items to go through here, but I need to jump off and start up our Zoom meeting for our executive session.
Okay.
Just so that you all know, you're going to get an email from me inviting you to the executive session.
Okay.
And that is separate from this meeting. So if you could watch out for that in the next few minutes, I'm going to jump off here and get that set up.
Thank you. Thank you, Ann. So while Ann is doing that, we are on to briefing papers and other business. So any comments on briefing papers or any other business that any board members would like to bring up?
Kirsten, I will bring attention to the fleet services briefing paper that's in there. We are doing the work right now for Windsor Severance Fire and have collected sufficient funds to continue doing that from them. And it's also meeting, right now we have the capacity. We're going to have to take a serious look and maybe go through some exception report or exception processes and look at possibility of bringing on, as I said, maybe in the next month or two, coming back to the board with a discussion about an additional mechanic that we had in the budget that we forecast most likely would be totally paid for from the outside in an enterprise system, and we would still be able to use that person on our fleet as well. Windsor is very happy with what we've provided so far. Just basically some PM, some preventative maintenance and some repairs. Wellington is also very interested in coming into that mix, as well as we've even had some preliminary discussions and had some interest from Laramie Fire District, I believe number 2. If you could nod your head, Ryan, I can't remember if it's number 1 or not. I think it's number 2. Chief, number 1, which I believe is Chief Jason Coy up there. So we see a great potential for that. We wanted to put that on your radar. So you'd be ready for that. But right now it's beneficial to us. It's bringing in revenue for us as well as our neighbors.
Great. Thank you for talking about that, the fleet issue. Any other comments or questions on these briefing papers or any other business? I don't see any. And then we have correspondence. Any comments on correspondence or? Okay.
I would
any
just,
on that. There was a lot of correspondence, wasn't there?
yeah, I would just comment because you know, the city council never gets correspondence like that.
We sure don't.
Hey, now wait a minute. We can make that happen if you need to.
Yes, Darren, could you make that happen? That would be lovely.
I will. At your next council meeting, I'll make sure you have some nice notes.
Yeah, the Rocky Mountain High School students sure. Yeah, they were, and you know, that's wonderful. I'm glad. All joking aside, we don't. I could read some mean tweets like they do on the late night television shows, but we'll save that for another day. But yeah, it was very nice, and it's very nice for students to be recognizing that, and it's a good habit to get into for those students to be grateful, to show gratitude, and it's good to hear obviously that our firefighters and the chief and others are doing a great job. So it's always kind of heartwarming to see. I love the one I love the ones from the really little kids too. Keep up with the handwriting, kids.
Kristen?
Yes.
Can I just comment on the two? There was one from CSU Dispatch and one from Larimer County Dispatch as well. And just since we had the dispatch presentation, we do work closely also with CSU and 900, which is Larimer County. And April 12th through the 18th was National Communicators Week, and all the senior staff and battalion chiefs contributed funds, and we provided a $5 coffee gift card to the human beings supporting the local business while they're, during the pandemic, got those to every single dispatcher at 900, 500, and also at 100. And 100 usually does a week-long celebration where they invite us to come up. And last year it was a pirate party, and they weren't able to do that. So we also organized kind of the honor salutes for all 4 shifts for FC 911, and Fort Collins PD, UC Health, and PFA units all showed up and just turned our lights on and saluted them for the work that they do. So that was something that the executive team and the chief officers from PFA provided for them, and we wanted to include our other partners too, just to kind of brighten their days and their week during a time when they couldn't really celebrate. So
thank you that's fantastic. Yeah, I know it's good to celebrate the kind of unsung heroes amongst us. Great. Any other comments before we look at moving into executive session?
No, I'm going to ask Kirsten to come back on so she can walk us all through how we get there.
Okay, and I did see the email from Ann come through. So
no, Ann did come through. So
Okay, so after you make the motion to go into executive session, you will leave this meeting by clicking the button down at the bottom right of your screen.
Okay.
And then you will open the email from Ann and go into that Zoom meeting for the executive session. When you're done with that meeting, you can click on the link from the email for this meeting and come back in and then adjourn this meeting. And we will just be waiting here until you come back.
Sounds good. So there'll be a lot of clicking on
Yeah.
clicking on emails. Everybody get your clickers
we need to
ready.
make our motion first, right? And then
Sure, of course.
Yes.
Did somebody want to make that motion? Or I can do it if nobody wants to.
Yeah, in front of you, Chris.
I have it. If
Yeah, go ahead, Kristen.
Why don't you go ahead and do it?
Okay. Let's see. Do we have all right. So, as permitted by Colorado Revised Statute Section 24-6-402 4B and E, I move that the board go into executive session to receive advice of legal counsel on matters related to IAFF Local 1945.
Second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye. Okay, we'll be moving into executive session and we will be back as soon as we're done. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
we've got our quorum. So
We do have a quorum back, so.
Okay, sorry. It took me a while to find the link first. And then Darren called me and said he couldn't get back on the phone. But I think that we don't need to vote on adjourning, right? I can just adjourn as the
Yes.
chief, is that right?
yes.
Okay, so is there any other business to come before the board? Hearing none, then we stand adjourned. Thank you for tuning in today.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Have a good day.
Keep up the
All
good
right.
Everybody.
See ya.
Have a good week. Bye-bye.